Okay, so we have been looking at encoding our responses using JSON. So we want to look on the other side on how do we decode requests that are coming from the client. And so to do this, we will discuss how do we actually create or give the client the ability to create a new school. All right. Okay, so let's open up schools.go. Okay. All right, and we want to be able to create a new school. So we need to modify our handler. Okay. Now, whenever we want to create a new school, it simply means that the user will be providing this data for this new school as a JSON object. And so our job is to take that JSON object and decode it. And so the best way to do this is to simply use a struct. Okay, so we're going to have our target decode destination. All right, so we're going to create an anonymous struct named input. And the reason why we say it's anonymous is simply because we are creating it inside of a method as opposed to outside any method as we have been doing in the past. All right, so this struct is only visible within our create school handler because it's only for this purpose that we're going to do that we need it. So there's no use to make it sort of global. All right, so this struct will have all the fields that we expect the user to provide in the JSON request. So we know that there will be a name, okay, of type string. And we also be able to use struct tags so that the user doesn't have to use a capital N for name. They can just use small letters. So again, we're going to use struct tags, JSON, name, right? And definitely we want them to provide the level. We want them to provide contact. And notice it's not everything that we previously looked at when it came to the response that the user will provide. So for example, the user will not provide version, the user will not provide ID, the user will not provide created at, because those are internal to our application. So it's only those things that the user considers important to actually make a school. So phone, contact. We have phone. We have email. We have website. We have address. And we have mode. Mode, of course, is a string, a slice of type string. And so website, address, and mode. Okay, so this is our struct that we want to put our data in that is used to create a new school. All right, so the next thing we need to do is to actually decode the JSON object that is coming in from the request. Okay, so we need to initialize a new JSON.decoder instance. Now, there are two ways of doing decoding. There is the method of using onMarshall, and there's a method of using decoder. It turns out that using decoder is the preferred approach. So we will be using that approach. All right, so the first thing we need to do is to actually create a new decoder. Okay, and this new decoder expects some object, some variable, something R of type IO reader, and it returns a pointer to a JSON.decoder object. Now, all we need to provide it is r.body, because r.body implements the IO reader interface. Okay, and so what we want to do now, since we know that this is a new decoder object that will be returned to us, it's a pointer. Okay, notice it's a pointer. Right? It's a pointer to a decoder. And so what I can do with that decoder is to call the decode function on that decoder object. And the only thing I need to provide this decode function is v, which is something that is pointed to. Okay, so v is a pointer. In other words, we need to pass in where we want the data, the keys, the values, we want that where should we store them. And it makes sense to put them in this input struct. And so we will just say, this is the address of where we want you to put those values. And notice we have to use the address. All right? Similar to what we did when we were working with PostgreSQL, and we had to provide the address of the variables that we use to store the data coming in from the database. Okay, and so we need to check for error. So if error not equal to nil, then we need some response. So we're going to simply say error response. And error response requires W, requires R, the status, and a message. So W, R, the status will simply be HTTP dot status bad request. So something went wrong. The client provided a bad request. Okay, and then of course we need to provide a message. We'll get that message from error. Okay, and because it's an error, we need to exit the handler prematurely. So return. Okay, so assuming that there are no errors, all we will do is to display the request. Okay, and we'll just for now use fmt.fprintf, and we'll simply provide W, and we'll provide a format string. So let's use modulus. We're going to use plus because we want the field names, and v, of course, and we will use input. Okay. If you recall, that's how we print a struct. All right, so this looks good. Now, how do we test this thing? Well, let's save this. Let's open a terminal. Let's start the server. Yeah, starting the server. And so we need to construct a request. All right, and so I went ahead and I did that because I want to save on the typing. All right, so I have body equal, notice there's no space. And I have a single quote here and end with a single quote. So I have name, I have level, I have contact, I have phone, I have address, I have, yeah, and I have address. So I basically left out a couple of them, okay? So what happens if you leave out a couple of them? Well, we expect the zero value to be used. Okay, so if I say echo $body, okay, I get back my request. Great. So we have a request we can use. And so all I'm going to do now is to use curl, and I'm going to use -i, of course. But to specify that we'll provide a body, I'm going to use the -d option. And in double quotes, I'm going to use $body. Okay. And this will be provided to which URL? Well, localhost, okay, 4000 /v1 /schools. Okay, and so we get an OK 200, and then of course we get the struct printing out the request. So notice, because it's a struct, any field that is missing, for example, email, if you recall, the zero value of a string is the empty string. And so it's like an empty space. Website, empty space. Address, of course. And for mode, since mode is a slice, the zero value for a slice is just the empty slice. All right? So, of course, if you're going to create a school, then we're going to assume that the school has everything. So let's say I put maybe email to be jsmith at gmail.com. Let's see, the website is xyz.com. All right, let's see. It works. Okay, so notice we provided every key, every field that is required. All right, and so every field has a value. All right, so again, if any of the fields are not provided in the request, then those will default to the zero value. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so that's it. We now know how to provide a request using JSON. However, this is the first step. In the next lesson, we will pick up where we left off from here, and we will deal with how do we handle bad requests. Let's say the user intentionally or unintentionally is providing bad data. All right. what do we do? I'll see you in that next lesson. All right, before we go, I haven't made a commit for a long time. So let me just do a commit. Git add, git commit. Message added. The ability, added the feature to add a school via a JSON request. Okay, so let me push. Right. I will deal with this. All right, so let me just ORIGIN. Okay, so we have pushed. All right, so that's the end. I'll see you in the next one.